Welcome to Jackson State Constitution Day. My name is Dr. Lawrence Gunderson. I'm professor of history and political science at Jackson State. And I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about the Constitution, but there's something really interesting that's been going on in the news lately. And that's been there has been a call for doing away with the Electoral College. So I want to try to address some of those issues with you by talking a little bit about the Electoral College and talking a little bit about apportionment and a little bit about what our founding fathers were actually trying to do. So the first thing that I want to talk to you about is the Electoral College. Now, it's difficult to talk about the Electoral College unless you know who is represented in the Electoral College. The Electoral College is represented by members of the House of Representatives and the Senate. There are 535 members of the Electoral College, and then you have the president or the vice president who can vote a dissenting vote. So you basically, that's where we are now. That's not where we were at the founding of this country. At the founding of this country, one of the big questions was between, how are we going to be represented in this new legislative body? The states with larger populations wanted more representation, and states with smaller populations wanted the same. And larger states had more land, said, well, we should have more representation. And so there were a couple plans developed, the Virginia plan, the New Jersey plan, the large state, small state plan. And ultimately they come up with what is the Connecticut Compromise or the Great Compromise. And in that, they don't have a one house Congress represented by population or equal representation or a unicameral legislature. What they come up with is a two-house legislature similar to England's House of Commons and House of Lords, what make up Parliament, the lower house, House of Commons, the upper house, House of Lords. So they came up with something very similar to that, and the upper house would be afforded 2 votes, or 2 senators. In the upper house, every state would be afforded 2 senators, and and then in the lower house, the House of Representatives, each state would get representation based on their population. Okay, so fast forward a little bit, where are we today? Well, where we are today is that some states are technically overrepresented in the Senate. I mean, if you think about it, if you look at states like Alaska or Wyoming, which have, less than 1 million people, they have 2 senators, 1 representative. Tennessee, North Carolina, 13, 14, somewhere in there. So there's much larger populations, even in Tennessee, 14 times the population. So, and by the way, each state today, and I'm going to get into that in just a minute when we talk about apportionment, but each state today represents, or each representative today in the House of Representatives represents about 600,000 people. Some of our founding fathers, especially the Anti-Federalists, thought this was an inadequate number to truly represent the interests of the people. And when they sit down and they try to put all this together, they decide that it has to, that really the Constitution, and they're coming out of the Articles of Confederation, which just simply got them through the war. And now they're really coming into some problems, and they're trying to figure out how they're going to govern and how they're going to have, elected representation, et cetera. So we talked a little bit about the Electoral College, what makes up the Electoral College. I've talked to you a little bit about the Senate and a little bit about the House of Representatives and how the Senate could somehow, some people would say it's overrepresented. Well, to a certain extent, it's true. And if you look at some of the Senate committees, which dominate natural resources in the United States, the Interior Department, things of that nature, they're dominated by Western states because they believe that those are their resources to exploit. So that's a little bit about the Electoral College. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about apportionment. How do we get to this Electoral College with all these electors that elect a president? And, there would have to be a fundamental change to the Constitution to be able to do away with the Electoral College, to be able to change it and get rid of it. And I just don't think that that's going to happen. I mean, I don't see a lot happening in Washington these days. It's almost like paralysis. So thinking that this might get reformed is almost ludicrous. Anyway, so a little bit about apportionment. Now, as the founding fathers are sitting down trying to put together something that resembles a new idea, revolutionary idea, what we would call a democracy, they came upon this idea that they're going to have a constitution. And initially, they thought this would be set in stone. And then, the anti-federalists are saying, no, you left out a whole lot of stuff here. And it needs to be kind of a living, breathing document. It needs to be able to change over time. And of course, that's where we have the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, and we have other amendments since then. But the first 10 amendments are the Bill of Rights, which were, the anti-federalists, they weren't going to leave until they got something on paper. But I want to go back to this whole issue of apportionment and talk a little bit about their pay. But first, let's, at the Constitutional Convention, the founding fathers had long discussions about how this representation in the House was going to work. And they argued and they argued and they argued. The Federalists said, okay, there'll not be more than one representative for every 40,000 people. And the Federalists saying, no, the anti-Federalists saying, no, that's not enough. We need way more. And so finally, after all this debate, on one of the last days of the debate about it, finally George Washington stood up and he said, I think the anti-Federalist argument to lower it to 30,000 would be a sufficient thing to do, or something to that effect. So they did it. But it doesn't materially change the equation of what that representation is going to do. It's simply going to grow. Because if it's not more than one representative for every 30,000, you've not violated it by having not one for every 600,000 or 700,000, what we have today. Okay. That's what the anti-federalists were really kind of concerned about. Well, one of their big concerns. So I want you to think about how these electors match members of the House of Representatives in numbers, okay, and why this is important. Also understand that the South somewhat dominated the Electoral College and the House of Representatives in the early Republic until after the Civil War, primarily because of the institution of slavery, where they could count, 3/5 of a slave as a citizen, which gave them more citizens during the census, which is given every 10 years. Okay, Article 2 of this Article 2 of the Constitution deals with this apportionment. And originally, each state was going to be afforded this many representatives, this many. Okay, the Federalists were deathly afraid of a strong central government. But I want you to think about a strong central government too now. You don't build aircraft carriers without it. States don't build aircraft carriers. So you kind of need a strong central government. And that gets into the whole thing about taxes, and we don't want to go there. We're just talking about the Constitution today. So back to this whole thing of apportionment. The anti-federalists were really upset that this number really didn't meet their needs. And they were fearful that this Federalist army would come out of this stronghold of Washington, D.C. and squash the liberties of all the states and things of this nature. Well, that didn't occur either. Flash forward to today. And nothing, you hear people say nothing gets done in Congress. We've got a permanent Congress. We can't get rid of these people. They go up there for life. Our founding fathers, the anti-federalists especially, understood that. And that's why they didn't want to pay them much. Okay, today, remember the House of Representatives, about $150,000 a year, but they have to maintain a residency back home. They have to maintain a residency in Washington. Usually they share an apartment with 3-4 people. It used to be a bipartisan thing. They shared apartments, not anymore. So they make about $150,000 a year. Now, there's a thought out there that maybe we could go back to this anti-federalist thinking and get rid of this permanent Congress by making it not so lucrative. So how do we do that without increasing, the budget? Well, get too much. Double their number and cut their pay in half? 75,000, you're going to scratch by at home, and you will definitely be shacking up with about 4 or 5 other people while you're in Washington in a small apartment somewhere, sleeping on a couch or something, or in a bunk bed, okay, through at least 3-4 days a week while you're there. Okay, so why don't we have a more numerous House of Representatives? I don't know. Okay, so let's go back to the Electoral College and this whole debate about getting rid of it. Okay, possibly, but we have to amend the Constitution. Okay, and then that's possible, living, breathing document, all that. Okay. All right, let's go to the office of the president. That's another thing in debate right now. And the Electoral College, that elects the president, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so there's been some debate about, presidents, we have a constitutional amendment that says the president does 2 terms. That's it. Since FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, they did 2 terms, that's it, they're out. It's constitutionally mandated. Unless you amend the Constitution, that's not going to change. However, there has been some criticism of the existing structure by some political scientists. And I want to mention them to you real quick because I think there's some interesting ideas. One is to go to a 1-term, 4-year presidency. One is to go to a 6-year, 1-term presidency. Not a bad idea, but part of the problem we have today is that when a president is elected and they're planning to get reelected, we get 2 years worth of work out of them, then they hit the campaign trail for 2 years, we get nothing out of them. And then they get reelected, and then they became lame ducks, and they really don't have to do anything. And historically, that's when they go foreign adventuring and all that. Okay, so if you want to change the Electoral College, as I said, you're going to have to change the Constitution. Well, it may be easier to amend the Constitution to change the terms of office. So what about a 6-year presidency? Well, not a bad idea because you get them one time. They work for 6 straight years. You're done with them. 4-year term, you're going to get 4 years worth of work out of them, then they're gone. What happens if they're really great? Okay. On the other side of the equation, somebody said, well, a 6-year, just 1 term, 6 years, and that's it for the president. Maybe not a bad idea, but what happens if they're a complete loser and you're stuck with them for 6 years? Okay. So those are just some of the things that I wanted to share with you today on Constitution Day, some of the interesting discussions that have been had in the past. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Please think about the Constitution. We have elections all the time. And as they say in Chicago, vote early and vote often. Have a great day.